Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Unleashed with Carrie. Today, I have Melissa Corkum with us. She is a homeschooling mom and an ADHD parenting coach, and I'm really excited to talk with her. Like you, like me, she's been through it all. The grocery store meltdowns, the remarks that you're the worst mom ever, the defiance from the kids when you're just at the end of your rope and you want to fall down on the floor and burst into tears. She's been there, but what she does now is work with parents and families to create thriving parent-child relationship. She knows what works, she knows what doesn't, and she wants to help you out so you do not have to learn the hard way. So here is Melissa. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Carrie. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. I guess I want to jam out today about homeschooling.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
I have a 4 and 2-year-old, if anyone doesn't know, and we're sort of unofficially homeschooling this year. A lot of my teenage clients beg me to convince their parents to homeschool them or to convince their parents to let me homeschool them, which doesn't exactly work where we are in Maryland. But I thought parents would really like to hear what homeschooling is all about, what it can look like, what it doesn't have to look like, and everything in between. Also, parents need to know regulations are different by state, but the picture that they may have in their brains about homeschooling may be very different than homeschooling in real life. So let's start with you. You're a homeschooling mom.
Yeah, so we have 6 kids, and 3 of them are still schooling age. And one of them is in public school, but 2 of them are currently still homeschooled. Once upon a time, I actually homeschooled all 6 of them. So we've kind of done a little bit of everything. We've also done private school. So what I normally say to parents who are considering homeschooling is take whatever you think homeschooling is and throw it out the window. A lot of people, I think, who are not super familiar with the homeschooling world, maybe you don't know anyone close to you who is homeschooling, basically think that homeschooling is school at home. And when I say that, I mean like school as we remember it, classroom type environment at home, but maybe, with less people, maybe more one-on-one, but they think of a very kind of structured environment, and they often think that it's very time consuming, which it can be depending on the age and skill level of your child. But it is not for sure sitting down with your child for 7 hours a day, just like a normal school day, and being their teacher all day long. Like, it's not like you have to resign your whole life and teach your child all day long. So that, I think, is the biggest misnomer that I come up against.
For sure. And I want to add to that I think also the picture a lot of times that families have of school is not even what school is like these days. The whole old-fashioned style classroom where kids are quiet and raising their hands and the teacher's teaching and the kids are learning, like that doesn't really happen either.
Yeah, right. We see a lot about, is it like the reverse classroom? Like we see a lot of innovative teaching techniques, and of course technology has changed a lot over even the last 10 years.
Yeah. So you have 2 kiddos currently homeschooled. Why? Well, and you said you've homeschooled all 6 at some point. So why? Why did you make that decision?
Yeah, so we started in private school, and we knew that we were really huge fans of classical education. And basically what that just means is we really wanted to do a really well-rounded education, and we wanted to specifically stick to these very specific 3 stages of learning. And so that's probably neither here nor there for this conversation, but we found a classical school that we really, really liked. But it was expensive, and we had 3 kids by the time we were getting ready to put that 3rd kid into kindergarten, and another kid was going into full day school. Like the costs were kind of exponentially increasing. At the time, my husband was also between jobs, so financially this looked like not the best fiscal decision that we could make for our family, right? And at the time, I was not working full-time out of the house. So I had a lot of flexibility in my schedule. And we had a lot of families in our network and our community who were homeschooling. And I kind of I was one of those moms who always couldn't wait for all of her kids to be in school. Like, I love my kids, but I was going to be the mom that was popping the bottle of champagne when the last kid went off to kindergarten. And I was just about there. And so I was kind of reticent to homeschool because I thought I'm almost to freedom, friends.
Wow. So that's a huge shift there.
Oops, sorry. So just the idea of I was almost had all my kids in school and I really didn't want to bring them home, but it just made sense. I knew I could. I've always loved education. I tutored my way through college. And so we made the decision to, and it was really a fantastic decision. One of the main reasons that we saw as a benefit was that we could kind of shape what education meant for our kids. And we really wanted them to come out of their education experience loving learning. My husband and I are kind of lifetime students of all types of things. And we really just wanted our kids to enjoy learning new information. And my fear was that if they stayed in kind of more traditional schooling settings for too long, that all the boxes of school would make them associate education and learning with the school structure, and that they would come out thinking, I don't like school. Every kid says, I don't like school. Do I have to go to school? September's here. And we really didn't want that for them. So we wanted kind of the education lines to be a little bit more blurry with life. We wanted kind of them to be able to kind of go through life seeing learning as an adventure. So that's kind of how it started.
So have you seen that you've been able to maintain their curiosity and their love of learning?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So our 16-year-old is a junior at a local high school this year. And interestingly enough, he hates school, generally speaking. He doesn't love to go to school. Although, in all fairness, it's also his choice because he could be homeschooled if he wanted to, but he's choosing to go to school. But he has so many other opportunities to learn. So he watches a lot of YouTube and he's well-read, but so just recently he got really excited about learning about different cars and engines, and he was playing some kind of video game where you rebuild engines as part of it or whatever. And so all of a sudden, he knows more about cars than our local mechanic, our oldest son bought a car and put it in the driveway, and our 16-year-old popped the hood and he was like, oh yeah, this has this kind of engine, and in the newer designs it has this and this is why it's placed here. And he knew all this stuff, and clearly he's not learning this when he gets on the bus at 6:40 in the morning and comes home at 2:30 in the afternoon. But he knows where to go for information if he wants to, and he knows what excites him. He's really bright. I'm training him to be my virtual assistant, except he's not virtual. He's right, across the hall, but he's a quick learn. And so even though he's in the structure of school now, his mindset is different, I think, than the typical student. Even so much that he figured out last year as a sophomore, he wanted to plan his classes a certain way and do dual enrollment and get out of high school a year early or something like that. And he kind of took it to his guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor really didn't know what to do with it. I think her exact words were that's not what our kids do. It's not the way that life goes. But because he's had a lot of control over his education up until high school, his mindset for how he thinks about learning is I can do whatever I want as long as I can figure it out.
I think that's an amazing mindset. And I think that's something that we want to see more of in our students. And that's something I really try and teach my clients as well as their families, that, yeah, so their kids might be in school and that's fine. That works for some families. And there's still so many other opportunities to learn outside of that they shouldn't just be limited to the classroom walls, and that they can just learn so much more outside of school as well. And they should, that it's almost an obligation, I think, for us all to keep learning, because the more we learn, then the more we can serve others.
Yeah. Yeah. On the flip side, we also have a son who has pretty significant special needs. And we didn't know that when we went into homeschooling. He was still pretty young. We hadn't figured all that out yet. But homeschooling has served him really well too, because we can go at his pace. It takes him a lot longer to acquire information, to retain it, to keep it, to understand it. And we can serve him in a way that the public school system and even the private schools, because they have less staff and less resources, really can't. And because of his disability, he kind of has a like asynchronous like ability, and he does really well in reading, not so well in reading comprehension, really well in like memorization of facts and like learning, like, so if you tell him like something interesting about science, like he'll probably remember it forever, but you might have to teach him how to carry in math like 6 or 7 times a year. So it helps us, keep his reading level challenging for him, but interesting. It helps us be able to go back over the same math concepts 7 or 8 times a year, right? Like he doesn't have to be in 5th grade or 6th grade, right? We can do 2nd grade math and 9th grade reading and 4th grade English and 5th grade spelling, and all of these different mismatches that really meet him where he is.
How do you see that helping his confidence?
I think it's been huge because we live in the middle of nowhere, and while he is socialized, I promise, he is protected from a lot of those kind of social pressures of having to keep up. Now he has siblings, and so he's not oblivious to his struggles, but he is not in a classroom where he's constantly trying to keep up and he's constantly feeling like he can't. Like we're able to accommodate him, match his learning style. He gets a lot of breaks, a lot of freedom, a lot of time to still play outside and do a lot of those other things. So while he understands the challenges, he also lives a pretty fun and free life.
So one of the common objections I hear from people who don't really have a clear picture of homeschooling is, well, how are you going to socialize your kids? And I like to talk about it from the perspective of like, school isn't necessarily quality socialization either, especially when they're being asked to sit down and be quiet in a classroom, which is appropriate for learning at times. But it's a lot of sit down, be quiet, don't say that, don't do that. They get in this dynamic with adults that the adult is the one who teaches them and they're the learner, but they don't really get other relationships with adults. So how do you socialize your kids, and what are the benefits and drawbacks of doing that, homeschool style?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's always the extreme case, right? There's always homeschooling families or children that may not be what we would consider socialized. And for whatever reason, that seems to be like the stereotypical picture we have in our head. What's been really cool for our kids is the situations that they've been in are multi-level learning situations usually. So one room schoolhouse type things where you're learning with kids a little bit behind you and a little bit ahead of you. Social situations where you're socializing with people, not just your exact age, who have birthdays between September and, August of the same year that you were born, but learning how to socialize in multiple dynamics, how to include people who are younger than you, how to respect people and friends, peers who are older than you. Also for our son with special needs, that situation has been really good for him because he has a variety of friends that he can socialize with. And because he does struggle with kids who are more typical for his age, he can socialize with kids that are better fit for him where he is developmentally, without feeling ostracized, because everyone's playing with all different levels, and it helps him navigate and find a place where he does fit socially rather than being in a classroom of all 12-and-a-half-year-olds where he's the youngest one developmentally. We've just seen beautiful things where a lot of homeschool families get together and maybe the kids are playing Foursquare and you see older siblings helping their friend's younger sibling play and be included. Things that we just don't see on kind of the typical playground. And I mean, honestly, our kids aren't socializing very much in school because they are in classroom settings where it's super structured, and recess ends pretty much at 5th grade anyway. So if your kid's older than 10 or 11, they're not socializing very much other than like the 30 minutes that they should be eating, in the cafeteria. So we're able to give a lot more socialization in one sense to our kids who are homeschooled because they just don't school as much. They're much more efficient in getting their work done. They have a lot more free time. And then also because they're with us so often as little kids before they can stay home alone, they're going with us. They see us at the grocery store. They see us interacting with cashiers. They know the person at the post office. They're learning how to not just have social conversations, but make transactions, like life skill transactions. How do you find a coupon in the grocery store ad? How do you get the best deal on milk? How do you buy a book of stamps? How many stamps need to go in an envelope to mail the thing? Like they're getting all of these other things that are within our social construct in our culture. They may not be playing with friends, as often, or sitting shoulder to shoulder with their friends as often, but they're certainly learning a ton of social skills throughout their experience.
Yeah, the world of social skills is so much larger than just sitting next to your same age peers. And I think school is limiting in that sense, that students definitely need other opportunities to socialize outside of that.
Now, that being said, our 16-year-old is in school because he enjoys that classroom interaction. He is self-proclaimed pretty lazy when it comes to schoolwork. And so there's something about that like peer pressure, that like classroom atmosphere, a little bit of competition that he really thrives on. So that's working really well for him. We have another daughter in high school who, if you were to ask her point blank, wishes that she had more time with friends, because we do live in a pretty rural area. And so we have to be pretty intentional about getting her together with friends. But she has also weighed the benefits and the downfalls of all of that and has decided to stay homeschooled. And one of those benefits is she's been applying for jobs. She's 14 and a half. And there are less places than when I was growing up that will hire 14-year-olds, but it is legal in the state of Maryland. And so, she has the benefit of being able to say, I can work during the day if I need to. And she has a lot of flexibility in her schedule. So to her, she'd rather do that and just, take a little less time with friends. And we just have to work a little bit harder to make sure that she connects with some of her close friends.
So how do you facilitate those social relationships? You mentioned a group, like you get together with homeschooling families and being out in the community, but do you have formal groups therein, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a lot of communities and co-ops in our area. This is the first year in I think 8 years of homeschooling that we're not in one this year coming up, but I directed one for 4 or 5 years. And that was a pretty structured group. It was like, we called it going to school. We had classrooms and teachers and tutors and classes. We taught high school classes, and the grammar school kids, did their memory work and recitations and, all kinds of stuff together. And so they had lunch together, and they had recess. And, we've been part of communities that are focused more on like field trips and other social things. So we've been in groups that afford the kids to do science fairs and field days and field trips with a group of kids where we can take advantage of, kind of school only tours and discounts and things like that. So we've kind of done it all. There's a lot of informal groups too, get-togethers, meetups. And then for this year, our daughter has, one really close friend who's also homeschooled, and they really enjoy each other and they work really well together. So her mom and I are kind of co-teaching a couple classes where it's just the two girls. It's kind of like a mini classroom co-op experience. But we'll also get them together, because they don't have a school schedule the same way that public school kids do or private school kids do. We do a lot of sleepovers, because we live like a half an hour from different friends. So we'll, drop one of the girls off at one house one day and pick them up, a couple days later. And the girls will take their school with them and they'll do fun stuff, but they'll also study side by side. And, it's like a mini study hall. So there's a lot of opportunities. You just have to kind of think outside the box and be creative.
So you have the two right now who are currently homeschooling. What's a day look like? I'm sure it's different every day, but how many hours do you spend on school? How are you doing the teaching? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's really different between the two kids. So for our what we call kind of neurotypical kids who don't have learning disabilities and are pretty independent, once they can read for independence, they're pretty much on their own. So we will assign them assignments, or maybe if they're in a class in a co-op, they'll have an assignment, but they're pretty much responsible for, following up on their assignments, reading whatever reading material it is, working through the problems, math, whatever it is. And so they'll come to us, my husband or me, with questions, but they're pretty much on their own, and they can pretty much be on their own schedule. So we have an online learning system, kind of like almost like Blackboard for back when we were in college. Like, I can assign my kids schoolwork and they can look it up on their own app or their computer, see what it is and do it, check it off. I can put grades in there and things like that. So it's really, really hands off. For our son, who needs a little bit more help, it's kind of been a family effort. My husband and I both work from home, so we obviously have to have time to, do our respective jobs. But this year we're doing a lot of kind of like workbook and the kind of self-directed activities that are a good fit for our son. So he has a folder with a kind of to-do list in the front. It has a mix of like chores and fun things and activities. So it could say like empty the dishwasher and then go play outside for 30 minutes and then, do this math, social studies and science paper or whatever. And then, he's got all of his books and papers like in one place, and he has a little desk workstation set up, and he works through that. And we have a system where he checks it off one way once he's done it, and we check it off another way once we've checked to make sure that it's right. And so once a day, he usually sits down with one of us and we go through and do corrections with him. But I would say between planning and then like corrections, like an hour to an hour and a half a day tops right now, even between both kids.
So that's time for you, like an hour and a half.
Yeah, that where I like have to be actively interacting with them and like not doing something that I would typically be doing for work or whatever, doing that. I mean, they're working for longer hours than that independently, but that's about how long it takes me to either, pull papers for one kid and assign them or check different things.
Wow. So a lot of parents will say, especially for the older kids, well, gosh, I can't teach them. I don't know, higher math, or I don't know this history content. How do you address that?
Well, with the internet, there's so many options, right? So our daughter is doing higher level math on Khan Academy. It's totally free, so that's great. We have the ability to teach her higher math. My husband and I actually both have engineering degrees, so we love that. But, our kids, honestly, they don't always want to learn from us, right? So she does that, and then she has questions, she comes to us. She is taking sign language as her elective. I did that in college, so I kind of know it, but I also don't want to sit down with her for hours every day and teach her sign language. So we found an online solution. It's an interactive course where there's a live teacher. So she sits down and does that. We, again, share teaching responsibilities with other families. So last year she took American Lit with a friend of mine who adores literature and took time to read all of the books that were necessary to do that. Actually read them. I know. And I didn't want to do that, but I love science. And so I taught an anatomy and physiology class to the girls as a trade-off. So she did American Lit with them. I did anatomy and physiology, and we did all the things. We dissected, we did labs, we read a lot of cool books. So yeah, there's just a lot of ways to get around that. And again, I think it's limiting to think that we're the teacher in the sense that we have to impart the information. I think as homeschooling parents, we often more think of ourselves as like the guides, like we kind of help plot the path, and we're more teachers in the beginning. Like I spent a lot of hours teaching kids how to read when they were little and needed a lot more hand holding. So I was spending more like 3 to 5 hours a day with my kids when they were smaller and they couldn't read for themselves and things like that. But like I said, once they can read, they're pretty much on their own. And so there's definitely no reason why they can't learn way past what I already know using the internet and, all the resources that are available to them.
And that goes right back to what we want is developing that curiosity, keeping it going, and that independence. We're not really teaching kids to be independent if we're sitting there delivering all of the information to them.
Right. It's definitely not a spoon feeding system, which I think is different than the kind of typical classroom environment. And then there's also tutors, right? You can always, there's some states have laws about how much teaching has to be done by like the parent and how much can be kind of outsourced. Maryland's laws are kind of gray around that, and no one's really checking in on stuff like that, honestly. But if there's a subject that your child really wants to know, find a tutor, or find someone who knows better, get a friend, have an older sibling. We've had older siblings do things. Sometimes there's other older homeschool students that are looking for hours. I mean, there's just so many ways to skin this cat. And the other thing is because I work from home and I'm not always available, I've set really clear boundaries about, when the kids can get my help. I kind of have like mommy office hours, like this is when I'm available to help you. And so what happens a lot of times over the years is they have a question and they have to hold it until I'm available, and they kind of get frustrated that they can't move on. And so by the time I, check in on them and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to help, they're like, oh yeah, I already figured it out. Like, by necessity, they're just like, I'm just going to keep trying until, mom can help me. And then they kind of, need me less and less.
Yeah. I've been working on that with my kids too. I mean, they're little, but trying to be really purposeful about time blocking when I'm on like mommy kid playtime and when we're doing, learning stuff, which is when you're 4 and 2 is still like playtime.
Yeah.
And then when I'm working, from my computer versus when I'm working on household tasks, and really trying to be clear about the expectations for them, and then being consistent for me in how I respond to them during those times. And, it's a process, but we're really getting better. And I'm confident that by the time, they're older, we'll have it down. Now, and I'm sure it'll look different, every day, every year, as our life changes, but that's the beauty of it all.
Well, and I think that's another really important part, because sometimes I hear from parents, like, I can barely deal with my kid, when they get home from school until bedtime. I can't imagine having them around all day long, right? And I remember thinking that, but my whole mindset was different when I was a school parent, like when I was parenting a young child in school. I assumed that school would like provide a lot of that structure. And I kind of felt like I was just this like secondary, like we just needed to survive after school. It was just a couple hours, by the time they got home, and like we did homework and there was dinner and bath and whatever, like it was just get through it. And holiday breaks were a lot of the same. Like we didn't have a good pattern. We didn't have a good routine. So when you had a week off of school, we just kind of were like flying by the seat of our pants, and it never went well, right? Because we didn't have the structure, and it was kind of just like survive spring break until you go back to school. And what I noticed is once we were homeschooling and I was committed, and my mindset changed. Instead of like just surviving every day, it turned into like, oh, I'm in charge of this ship and this situation. And all of a sudden I put structure around it, and it got a lot easier. Right? Because I wasn't just trying to survive, the kids' unstructured time from this point to this point, from when they were in school to the next time they would be in school. I actually was controlling that. And once I started doing that, the expectation was very different. I was a lot more proactive about what we did with our time, and it just made everyone happier. So I also say to parents, once you're homeschooling full time, it's not like taking those like 3 hours after school when your kids are exhausted and they're kind of at their worst. It's not like that all day long. It really does kind of transform your relationship with your child. And I think the way that homeschool stays sustainable is exactly what you're talking about, which is having really clear boundaries. Because even if you don't work from home, you don't want your kids to have unfettered access to you all day long. You will burn out very, very quickly. So you need to learn that dance of, because you're all home all the time, how to have good personal boundaries for everyone.
And yeah, it's not good for the kids either to have access to you 24/7.
Correct.
Even for the little ones, like, boy, I would love to sit there and play with my kids all day. Okay, there's some things they do that I'm just not interested in, but generally speaking, I want to be with them. But I also recognize that's not helping them because they need to learn to play on their own. So that was a real struggle for me at first, was forcing myself not to be with them all the time.
Yeah.
And like what you said about when kids come home from school, if they've been in school all day, they are exhausted. They are frustrated for any number of reasons. The work is too easy, too hard. They don't understand. They asked a question, their teacher got mad because they asked a question. Something's going on with their friends. You know, there's all of these things coming at them when they're at school, and then they get home and they're just done. And then as parents, we're the ones that have to say, okay, now you have to do your homework and hope that gets done and turned in. And then you're responsible for getting them to bed, which if they're young can be a whole issue there. And it really is just battle time. Whereas when you're home with the kids during the day and it's after a good night of sleep and you're fresh and they're fresh and you're all happy, you're getting each other during your best time of day.
Yeah, and some of the things that make our kids really difficult, I always tell families that there are only 5 reasons that kids misbehave, and it's because something physically is not being met, like they're hungry, tired, sleepy. There's a sensory need, so they need to run around more, they need more, squeeze hugs, heavy work, whatever, they need to spin more, whatever. Felt safety, so they need to feel like, and this isn't just knowing with your head that you're safe, it's like your nervous system's like unconscious measuring of like, whether or not you're safe in your environment. Emotional regulation, so like your ability to regulate your emotions, and then skill things. Like sometimes, I always say, like, we do better if we assume that our kids are not doing something because they can't, not because they won't, right? And so when we take all of those things, a lot of the solutions for those things require us to have a little bit more control over our kids' schedules, because they might need a snack and water break every 2 hours. They might need a sensory break 3 times a day. They might need an extra accommodation because they are missing an executive skill need. And sometimes those things can get really hard at school because you don't get snack time past a certain age. Or like my son has lunch at like 10:35, I think, some days, like just because of the way the high school schedule works. He's home by 2:30. So there's all these things that we don't have control over that could be causing our kids to be really, really grumpy and exhausted when they get home. And so when we have them with us all day, we have a lot more control over that. And so we just are better at setting them up for success, which means their behavior will be better.
Yeah. How do you teach parents to tune into that? I'm an educator, so I have, a general sense of what's going on with a child, have a background in special ed, especially when it comes to sensory issues and whatnot. But I find even at school, when I am referring a student for an occupational therapy evaluation, I even have service providers telling me, oh no, their handwriting's fine. I'm like, no, but what about this whole sensory piece that's clearly a need that's not being addressed? And it drives me crazy. But how do you, since you work with parents and families, how do you get parents to tune into that stuff?
Well, I think education's a big piece. When they have a pain point that needs to be solved and you can give them some tips that get them small wins really fast, that's really helpful. But I think a lot of people appreciate even some of the brain science. And so when we just start talking about these things, if you have kind of typical kids, right, some of those things are annoying, but they're not impacting your life in a really significant way. If you have a child with pretty significant needs, those things, the meltdowns, the sensory needs, all of those things create a situation that make you feel either hopeless or really frustrated. You might feel like a failure as a parent. Like when you start feeling all of those feels, it doesn't feel good to feel that way. And so people are looking for solutions and not finding them. So when you can give really simple, clear explanations, it's actually super welcome because they're not hearing it from anywhere else.
Yeah. What's your biggest struggle as a homeschooling parent, either now or before when you had all 6 kids going through it?
Yeah. I mean, I think just like any mom, energy, patience, we're all human, just because I know these things in my head doesn't mean I always execute really, really well. Right. So I'm not going to say that it's all been a walk in the park or that every day is like hunky-dory and we're all like fabulous and no one ever yells at my house or, kids don't talk back or any of those things. We're just, we're kind of bumping along just like everyone else. But I do know better. Like at one point in time, I was a point in parenting where I had a lot of struggles and I really had no idea what was wrong with my kid or what was wrong with me. And I didn't know how to fix it. And that was like, that helpless feeling was pretty terrible. I'm in a place now where when I have a bad day, I can at least reflect back on it and think like, oh yeah, I probably could have done that differently. Like I kind of know what I should be doing. I just don't always do it, the way that I could be doing it. But I think that's the biggest struggle is just being consistent with the boundaries that I know will make everyone happy, right? It's not always easy, but it's the thing. I've learned a lot of hard lessons over the past 5 years about the importance of self-care as moms. And I almost even hesitate to say the word because it has so many different connotations and it's understood, but I define it for myself and for my clients as doing the things for ourselves as moms that make us better parents. So I sometimes am tempted to think, 4 hours of Hallmark is self-care. But it doesn't always make me a better parent at the end. And so to really distinguish the things that I need to be doing that energize me as a parent.
Yeah. So I was definitely one of those people that had one of those ick feelings about self-care. Like, ick, what's wrong with you? You need self-care. And my mindset has just totally shifted on that. And keeping in mind that it's proactive. These are proactive things that you do to make yourself a better human being. And that by modeling you being a better human being, you're modeling that growth for your kids as well and setting the stage for them to do it. And not just limiting self-care to, oh my gosh, things are out of control. I need a break. I'm going to go take a bubble bath. Like, that's a totally different thing. But just really being on that journey of bettering yourself as a human, but also walking that line. And I'm sure you have to get into this as your parent coach, walking that line of realizing like you are enough right now. I'm not saying that me or anyone else is not doing the best that they can do, because you probably are, but that you can also be doing better.
Well, there's this counterintuitive thing about, this concept of self-care that we actually, the things that we think we don't have time for are actually the things that help us become that better person. When we're like, oh, I'm just like, I yelled at my kids today again, I hate when I do that. I feel so bad. I feel so guilty. But there's, I think for every 50 bits of extrinsic information that we tell our kids, so those are things like, I love you, I'm here for you, like the things that we do tangibly, I'm going to make your lunch tomorrow, all those things. Our kids their nervous systems are taking in 11 billion bits of nonverbal communication from us, from our nervous system that we don't even know is happening. And another way to think about this is there's something called mirror neurons in our nervous system. So even if we're going through all the motions, we're saying all the right things, we're doing all the right things, we're making sure our kids are fed, we get them on the bus in the morning. If our nervous system is like frayed, like we're at the end of our rope and we're feeling internally like we're stressed, and it might not be our kids, maybe it's our job, maybe it's finances, the weather, I don't know, right? Our nervous system is firing off those stress signals and it's signaling our kids unconsciously. And so sometimes just even being aware of that, like we're not just doing this because we need to, because we're selfish. Like this literally is another way we can serve our kids, because their nervous system is what we call co-regulating off of our nervous system. And we can't control them. We can influence them, but you can't make a screaming kid like actually stop, right? But what we can do is control ourselves. And so if our nervous system is at peace, it's well fed, well rested, all of those things. It has endorphins because we took a walk in the morning and got some exercise in, then we're feeding that to our kids subconsciously. And what a gift to them for their nervous system to be in our presence and feel safe, which it might not be able to do in a lot of other places.
I had a pediatrician visit, standard, whatever, every year visit with my kids. And I had to fill out one of those mental health screenings for my 4-year-old. I was going through it, and I handed it to the doctor, and she goes, "Wow, you're really lucky. Your child seems really well adjusted." And it was such a shock to her that my child wasn't, I guess, showing symptoms of, depression or anxiety or whatever else. And at 4 years old, I mean, I think it's just scary. And I see so many students with anxiety, whether it's diagnosed or whether it's just, I recognize the symptoms. It's just like, it breaks my heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're just feeding. I mean, maybe it's not parents, but they're feeding off of other kids at school, nervous systems, or, the teacher's nervous system. Like, all of our nervous systems are interconnected in this, kind of confusing but interesting way. And so just think about all the different people that our kids are coming in contact with, and who might be stressed and who might be not. And so they're picking all of that up as they go.
Yeah, for sure. And then by us modeling also that we're taking care of ourselves, then they see it and they can do it. And it's just this cycle. So how do you feel about praise? Like you said, all the I love yous and all of those things. Obviously, we need to say those to our kids. But what I see often is that sometimes we give praise to students, and especially special needs students, especially with ADHD or anxiety, because that's kind of my focus level. And I find sometimes it does more harm than good, because it almost places emphasis on an outcome that they don't have confidence that they can handle or that they can do. I try to come at it from the I noticed. I noticed you wrote your name on the paper. Maybe they hadn't done that in 2 months. But instead of like this huge celebration, it's an I noticed. And I've had a lot of success with that, because I think it's reducing the burden of action. I don't know. I don't have a great way to say it, but do you have any thoughts or experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think subconsciously when we praise good behavior, there's this sense that their identity starts being wrapped up in performance. So I think praising our kids for who they are as people, the things that don't really change, is really important. Even just things like, I like being with you, just like, I like who you are as a person, or kind of calling out their character qualities rather than their behaviors, I think is really important. I love the I noticed statements. And I think even with our actions, we do it, right? A lot of parents use timeout as a way to, kind of, I think subconsciously we do it because we don't like being around people who have big feelings that are out of control, right? So we say like, pull yourself. Sometimes we even like say that, right? Like, I don't want to deal with your like tantrum, like go to your room. When you can pull yourself together, then you come out. And I'm saying this, but take it with a grain of salt, because I'm not saying that I've never said that or done this, right? Because we are all human. And sometimes it's for everyone's safety that the screaming kid gets out of my presence. But, I think when we do that as our go-to, we're giving this unspoken message to our kids that we don't want to be around them unless they have their shit together. And so sometimes kids need to decompress and have a space, but I think how we approach that with them it matters, right? We still might be having them go to their room to calm down. But if we say like, hey, it seems like you're really overwhelmed right now. Like, why don't you go sit on your bed where it's kind of quiet, take a couple minutes and I'll be right here whenever you need me. Right. Or I'll come check on you in 5 minutes. Is a way different than like, go to your room, you're freaking out. Like, I don't want to be with you right now. It still gets us the same results, but I think the message that we're sending about who our kids are and how their behavior is and how that affects us and what that says about their identity is significantly different.
And I think it's also a difference between teaching them that these feelings are okay. I feel like we live in a world where it's considered bad to feel angry for a minute or sad. And, you know, if we have a couple days where we're feeling sad, we're like, oh, I'm depressed. And I feel like sometimes we confuse having feelings with something bad.
Yeah, well, Brene Brown talks about the difference between like guilt and shame. That guilt is like, I'm sorry that I did something, or I'm, you know, whatever I did is bad. And shame is like, I am bad. And I think we have to just be careful about how we're communicating those things to our kids and their actions. And we do, you know, society wraps up a lot of identity in behaviors, your grades, your, you know, what job you get, you know, all of these things sometimes for some families equal some sort of identity.
So how do you balance all of this? Like the homeschooling, the being a parent, how do your roles change as teacher and parent, or are they kind of one and the same? Do you see them differently?
Yeah, I think they're pretty integrated, just like we want learning in our family to be pretty integrated, not too much like, you know, this box and that box. I think balance is a really tricky concept. I don't think we're ever really balanced in all the ways that we want to be. I think it's kind of a misnomer, but I think that's okay. I think we need to be okay with the imbalance. Like right now, my husband and I are both building pretty brand new businesses, and, you know, basically that requires a lot of work up front. Like at some point they're going to get a little bit more self-sustainable. They'll need a little bit more of, you know, a little bit less of me. There, you know, hopefully there'll be other people on our team and things like that. So right now I spend a lot of time working on my business. It does not balance out with the amount of time I spend homeschooling my children. It doesn't balance out at all with the amount of housework I'm getting done, because that's certainly not happening, right? But that's kind of the season that we've adopted, and we're okay with that. There was a season when I was homeschooling all 6 kids that I didn't have a job and I didn't own a business, and I spent a lot of time with my kids, a lot of time answering questions, a lot of time teaching the same spelling lesson to 4 different kids, you know, over the same day. And that was that. So, I think we just have to be clear on our roles, clear on what we can do, clear that we're human and there's only so many hours in a day. And I think we have to be really clear on what success is. And that's really different for everybody. But just remember that as individuals, we can only define success in terms of things that we can control. So I have learned not to define my success in what my kids are learning or not learning, and what their behaviors are. I am influencing that, but I can't control that. So if we have to teach the same math lesson for the 3rd time in the month, I can't, that's not on me, right? Like that's not on my teaching skill necessarily, you know, like, especially because I'm talking about a child who has an identified learning disability, right? This isn't about me being a bad teacher or him even being a bad student. But in those cases, I have to kind of redefine success as like my ability to deliver a math lesson a 3rd time in a month while still keeping my cool, because I'm not real happy about it, right? So I think that in terms of balance and success, you know, we have a lot of control in how we define those things. And I think that can help us either feel successful or feel like failures.
I like to call it flow, you know, not balance. I agree with you that balance just gives the whole wrong idea, because nothing is ever balanced, or if it is, it's only for a brief moment and then something goes out of whack again. Do you have a definition of success for you or for your family?
Yeah, we, on a really broad term, and we have older kids. So our youngest is almost 13 and our oldest is 21. And we have started filtering our parenting decisions, at least the big ones, through the lens of, am I still connected with my child? Or I just saw a meme recently that said, it's not that our kids won't have problems. I think it said like, but, you know, will they call you? Basically, will we be their solution, or will they not call us because they know they're going to be judged for those things? Like how have we left our relationship with our kids as they start to grow? So that has really defined, and we didn't define parenting like that for our oldest 3 kids. And we made a lot of poor decisions. And what we found out is, if you don't play your cards right, your kids will walk away from you. And because 4 of our kids came to us through adoption, including our oldest 3, and they didn't have super strong attachments to our family. And so it didn't take much for them to walk out at 16 and 17 and be like, yeah, that was fun. I decided that it's not really for me. And I don't really want to talk to you again. And unfortunately, they kind of came around. It took a little bit of work on our part and a lot of humility to realize that we created a situation where our kids, once they didn't have to be with us, didn't want to be with us. And we realized that that's not really what we wanted for our kids. We wanted them, we didn't want them to make mistakes, and we wanted to try to protect them. More importantly, we wanted them to stay connected to us. So we use a lot of that in our parenting. Is that a battle worth fighting? Is that going to push our kids further away from us, or is it going to bring them closer? And, what's the worst that can happen if we let them learn that lesson the hard way, in order to be a safe place for them to continue to learn their lessons versus, trying to protect them from their lessons, but at the end, not having that relationship.
I love that. I kind of define it for us about, I just want to create a life that my family is excited to wake up to and live every day.
I love that.
But, I don't think that's all that dissimilar from yours, because we're not going to be getting up and wanting to live our life if we're disconnected.
Right. Right. They're not going to want to get up and do life with you if the first thing out of your mouth every morning is like, are you sure you want to wear that to school? Or, what are you listening to on your phone? If we're criticizing their music choices and their clothes choices and all of those things, we all did it as teenagers, right? We all walked that walk, lived that thing. And at the end of the day, it's just not as important as the relationship.
So I guess one more technical homeschooling question is, what's the process? Now, it's different in every state for people who are listening, but for you, what's the process from declaring to homeschooling to reporting? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we live in Maryland. We're kind of middle of the road. So there are states that are much more stringent in their reporting and their kind of record keeping process. And then there are also states that are much more lenient. So we're about middle of the road. In our county, in our state, you're supposed to give 2 weeks notice that you're going to homeschool, but most people usually make that decision during a school break, like over a summer or maybe Christmas break mid-year. And there's a piece of paper that you can get. You can download it off of the school website. It's called a something intent, declaration of intent, or intent to homeschool, or something like that. You fill that out, you send it into your local school, and basically that 2 weeks is for them to kind of process it. In Maryland, you have 2 options for how to report. You can report directly to your home county, or you can join a third-party reporting organization. Sometimes they're called umbrellas. That's the way I would recommend going in Maryland. For whatever reason, how they have it set up, umbrellas only report once a year, whereas if you report directly to the county, you have to be reviewed twice a year. It does cost to join an umbrella, but it's pretty nominal, like $70 to $100 a year. Totally worth it for the peace of mind. A lot of those umbrellas work on what we call a peer review system. So you just get together with another homeschool mom who is under your same umbrella, and you peer review each other and then turn that in to your umbrella, and then they in turn report to the state on your behalf. It's really easy in the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland only requires, the wording is that we have to provide regular and thorough instruction in a list of subjects like math, English, social studies, science, art, phys ed, those types of things. But again, it's pretty lenient when you're doing a peer review to what that looks like. Health can be, we planted a garden and talked about the veggies this year. So, but yeah, check with your school board is probably the best way. There are some national homeschooling organizations. We have leaned on the legal counsel of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. They have a lot of free information on their website. There probably is a state guide there for how to homeschool in your state. But then there's also a membership level. And part of that membership is if for some reason someone were to come after you because of a misnomer or something else in a homeschool situation, then they can legally protect you and tell you, provide you what your rights are.
What was that called?
The Homeschool Legal Defense Association. It's hslda.org.
Got it. Thank you. I'll put that in the notes. What's your record keeping look like? Like just some scribbled notes on a piece of paper or a binder? I kind of have this vision. For me, the record keeping part would be tough. I love the teaching and the doing things, but the record keeping, not so much.
Yeah, in Maryland, they review on what we call a portfolio for kids that are anything younger than high school. So it's 8th grade and younger. And so you basically just provide a sampling of work in all of those subjects that shows that you do something like from the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year that basically shows you made some kind of progress. Certificate, like if you're for phys ed, if you do like gymnastics, which is another extracurriculars, another great way to socialize, right? Our kids are in dance and gymnastics and Ninja Warrior and soccer teams. All of those places have plenty of friends and times to socialize. But so you can use, pictures of trophies and certificates of completion and things like that. So it's actually not as hard. It's a little bit dicier in high school. Like I talked about, we have an online system that we use where we input grades, and that kind of helps us at the end. But at the end of the year, really for high school, you just have to know what grade your child has. So however you're keeping track of that, and you turn in basically the equivalent of a report card to your reporting agency, and they spit you back a transcript.
Got it. Okay. So I think that makes it seem less scary, less weird, any of those things that maybe some of us have as preconceived notions. So
yeah, and different states are different. So in some states you are required to do more detailed record keeping. Some states require you to keep attendance. I don't even know how we would ever do that in our house because school is so fluid and it happens in so many different, I'm like, yeah, we were always here. Like we never died. But some states do require a little bit more formal of a schedule. But in Maryland, as long as you stay in Maryland, it's really easy. And I can tell you which homeschool umbrella we're under, and you can join me and I can be your reviewer.
Yeah, what is that?
So we review under something called Churchville Christian School, and they review, they're really hands-off. Like literally I just pay for them for the right to not have to ever talk to the county ever again. I pay like $85 a year. It's the best $85 I ever spend. And I think they have jurisdiction in Cecil, Hartford, Baltimore, maybe Carroll County or something like that. So
that sounds fabulous. I'm totally going to be looking into it.
Yeah.
So before we go, tell us about your business, who you help, and how you help them.
Yeah, so I love working with families who are just struggling with challenging behaviors, especially families whose kids may be diagnosed or you may think should be diagnosed with ADHD. I work a lot also with adoptive and foster families, since that's part of our story. And basically, I am like the parent manual that you wish your kids came with. And I work really hard to provide resources to families so that they can laugh more and yell less with their kids, because that's kind of really what we're going for. We don't want to spend all of our parenting days or look back on all of those days, wishing that they were different or feeling guilty that all we did was point fingers and yell and scream and nag. So that's what I do. I have a couple levels of services. I have a free newsletter and a free Facebook support group. But all of that's on my website, and you can find that at thecorkboardonline.com. There's a free behavior handbook there, and then links to other services, ways to work either privately with me or in group coaching, online classes, things like that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited, and you're totally going to be my homeschooling person as we go forward here and I figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Carrie.
Absolutely. Take care.